most of that time, you're speaking to witnesses, you're calling people up, you're doing investigations, you're piecing together the puzzle. Have you ever come across, obviously you've come across a lot of interesting people. Have you ever come across someone or multiple persons off camera that have completely shifted the way that you see this phenomenon?
Yeah. Specifically surrounding the U.S. Army.
Okay.
There is a witness that in their official capacity in the Army brushed up against legacy programs that were conducted under a U.S. Army general. That testimony has revolutionized how I see this entire subject. And from what I've been able to piece together from there, at least to gain a little bit of understanding into how legacy programs in the U.S. Army work, because as far as I'm concerned, I think programs are pretty siloed between Army, Navy, and Air Force, and there's probably a mix of intelligence agencies, probably some ones we don't know that pull some strings, but that really shifted my worldview. And then, of course, talking to other firsthand witnesses and just taking in testimony. I'll tell you what, I can't dive too much into this testimony just because I told this guy I wouldn't, do a full deep dive into his subject without him being right by me, but lately, there's all the scuttlebutt about is the 2004 Nimitz Tic Tac human-made, right?
Yeah. Is it Lockheed Martin? Is it NHI? Is it both? What is it?
Roscoe has said that it's made waves. And of course, Greer has been saying since 2018 or 2019, it's Lockheed Skunk Works tech. But he's never provided anything on that.
And then Jeremy Corbell was also told that he was given what he thinks is more passage material, told, oh, this is definitely, Lockheed or whatever, which he was not believing that. So what is it?
I don't know, because there's one guy I've talked to. I think he's still employed in military service, but in 1991 or 2, just following the Gulf War in the Azores Islands, which is a U.S. air base right off the coast of Portugal, a C-5 Galaxy from a U.S. airlift wing pulled in, front opens, and what else is pulled out but a Tic Tac?
So on a flatbed.
No, it's I don't know if it's on pallets, but it's not on a truck yet. It was loaded onto a truck.
Oh.
It was covered in a tarp and scaffolding or whatever, straps, described as pearlescent, perfect, beautiful. But the interesting thing this witness said to me is, as the Tic Tac was being loaded up into a sufficiently large trailer or a van or something, that the tarp started to kind of come loose, and some airmen, servicemen went to go reattach the tarp, and a couple of them became violently ill.
On the spot?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
And this thing is loaded up into a van with unmarked civilians driven away. So we're left with a couple conclusions, if this testimony is true, which I personally believe it is. Was this thing recovered and being shipped back? But the airlift wing that was seen by the witness operates out near McLean, Virginia. So was this thing flown from Virginia to Lajes Island to do some testing over water?
Right.
Was this thing recovered in England, mainland Europe, and brought to Lajes Field to transport back to the U.S. mainland to be given to the Navy? I don't know.
That's the thing, too, that if you're capable of maneuvering this thing and flying this thing and piloting this thing in the way that is described by Commander Fravor,
right,
you wouldn't need to load it up in a truck and put it on an airplane, then, would you? Yeah.
No.
So to me, that says NHI.
Right.
That says, well, at least that says foreign. It says, and that's the other thing. The group that was running that into the truck, maybe they wouldn't even know.
Right.
Where it's
like
from.
A huge pill.
Exactly. And to them, it might look alien as well, but it might be some deeper military cover. Who knows?
And if Lockheed Martin has that technology, if we're adhering to the paper, Unidentified Anomalous Characteristics of UAP, I can't remember what the paper's titled, by Kevin Knuth, yeah. The drop from a huge altitude to sea level in a fraction of a second subjected the craft to northwards of 5,500 Gs. Which, if humans have that capability, that is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, our best ballistic missiles start to tear apart at mid 120, 130 Gs.
Yeah, and that's unmanned. Manned, we can't go past.
Right. We would splatter.
Yeah, exactly. We would splatter, and a lot of the craft that are capable of sustaining, the amount of Gs that we can sustain would also start falling apart.
Right.
Burning up and shredding and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah.
If the Tic Tac is human-made, that brings some interesting questions, because one of the ubiquitous things about non-human crash retrievals are the perfection of the craft. Absence of rivets, bolts, and seams, sometimes cockpits, landing gear, human characteristics that we would identify with airframes.
Yeah.
And according to Fravor, according to this witness, of course, the Tic Tac is just perfect. The only thing that stands out weird about Fravor's account are the little prongs on the bottom, you know?
Yeah, that seems like almost meant to attach itself to something else. Or
well, that could have been the thing churning under the water.
Right. Yeah, which brings me to, obviously, what I've been a little mildly obsessed with is this 4chan whistleblower, you know, and I say that and people rightfully cringe at the word 4chan, which you should, and you should be skeptical. You know, my argument in this situation is that I got to work with what I'm given, you know, so if you're giving me testimony on some weird, sketchy platform, I mean, that's what we got to work with. You know, I can't pick and choose. I can't FOIA request, you know, crash retrieval stuff. So we got to work with what we have. And that was something that really caught my eye, because one thing he said in his sort of Q&A that he had on 4chan near the end of one of the first pages was, notice, I don't care. I'm not here for you to believe me. Notice yourself coming back to this as time unfolds. And boy, I've been coming back to that time and time again, especially when the conversation turns to these things were deployed from the water, massive object moving underwater at 400 knots. You know, even the stuff with the drone stuff recently, a lot of that was over the water. There's a huge connection with this USO, you know, underwater, undersea or submerged objects or whatever it is. Do you give any credence to that whistleblower? And is there anything that he might have said during that testimony, and I say testimony, I use that very loosely, that corroborates or sort of points to some of the stuff that you've uncovered?
Well, kind of like you, I come back to that and look more favorably upon it as time goes on, because at least what I understand, Navy operations, undersea USO operations are some of the most secretive of the secret. I mean, the U.S. has its own unacknowledged intelligence agency that deals exclusively with underwater reconnaissance, the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office. Yeah, NURO. And
that John Ramirez, when he was on the pod, he said that was like the deepest recovery program.
Yeah.
Well, and no pun intended.
Yeah, so NURO is interesting because its roots, it was officially created in 1969, but its roots can be traced back to 1964 and probably prior. Chief Scientist of Special Projects of the Navy, John Pena Craven, was contracted to work on something called the Deep Submergence Systems Project, DSSP, in 1964. And the whole purpose of this was to drastically increase the capability at which the U.S. Navy could perform undersea ocean engineering. In 1965, he is brought into a briefing and told that the DSSP must satisfy something called Project Sand Dollar. Sand Dollar was a secretive project embedded in a project, embedded in another project, itself embedded in the Polaris ballistic missile submarine program, which was spearheaded by Admiral William F. Rayborn, who went on to join SAIC, but that's neither here nor there. He said Sand Dollar was an itemized inventory of every single item of national security interest, nuclear and otherwise, on the seafloor. And that to satisfy these conditions, the U.S. Navy would create something called the DSRV, Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle, and the DSSV, Deep Submergence Systems Vehicle, or something that could operate up to 20,000 feet deep, and that these would retrieve items from Sand Dollar on the seafloor. Now, outside of crashed Tomcats later on and other World War II bombers and other vehicles of interest. I
submarines,
do think,
maybe. Or,
yeah. Well, yeah, that's of course 1969.
Yeah.
Once NURO was created, its maiden voyage was on the Glomar Explorer to retrieve the K-129 Soviet submarine that crashed a bit north of Hawaii.
And then bombs as well, like duds. And yeah.
And what's interesting about that is 1972, that same year, there's a witness who talked to Leonard Stringfield, who said at the Great Lakes Naval Station up in Chicago that in 1972, a teardrop-shaped perfect UFO was brought in that was recovered by the Glomar north of Hawaii in 1972.
That's right, in Hawaii. I watched that in your latest video. Yeah.
That was really enjoyable to explore more, but that's why I put some credence into that 4chan whistleblower, because he put so much emphasis on undersea recovery